CCA Chandigarh College of Architecture presentation on urban villages of Chandigarh. CCA is a knowledge partner of the UV Research Grid on urban villages with COA, NIUA, FOA, and JMI. Dr. Sangeeta Mehta, Principal CCA Professor. She is an expert member of the International Scientific Committee on 20th Century Heritage, a jury member for the Urban Edge Prize Seminar. University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, she co-curated the Urban Edge exhibition on the urban villages within and around Chandigarh with a book, Chandigarh Rethink, on the city's natural and man-made edges. As Nodal Officer, UNESCO World Heritage Nomination of the Capitol Complex, Chandigarh 2015, she curated several heritage walks on the city's heritage zone. Studying the postgraduate architecture program at CCA, Dr. Mehta engages in summer-winter schools and co-curricular activities with equal passion, of which the latest has been the RIBA Presidents Medal exhibition and Symposium hosted at CCA. An invited residency to the Canadian Centre for Architecture, Montreal, for the Pierre Jeanneret archive and presentation of the State of Conservation report to UNESCO on the Capitol complex. Spearheading the institutional consultancy in CCA, Dr. Mehta has led the teams for projects like North Railway Stations Development, Accessible Indian Campaign Audit for Public Buildings in Chandigarh, Gram Panchayat Spatial Development Plan for Ministry of Panchayati Raj. Architect Vipendra Singh Thakur, Assistant Professor CCA. Vipendra Singh is a conservation architect and completed his MR Conservation from SPA Delhi in 2009. He has found years of experience in teaching academics, good monitoring, and time management in School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, and Anand College of Architecture, Agra. He worked with DD contractors in Adobe Architecture in Himachal, India. Vipendra also worked on the conservation of UNESCO Asian Pacific Award 2020, winning building Amar Singh College in Kashmir, India. He has co-authored a book titled Walking the Heritage of Sagar under Intact Sagar chapter. His sketch on Gridhakota Vihara, Vulture's Peak in Nalanda is a part of the book A Journey Through Bihar to Vihara 2015.
So this particular study that we have embarked upon in this studio from this very semester is linking the villages to the city. And Vandana did point out that earlier, when the city was in its inception stages, the first phase of the city, the villages were totally wiped out, and onto it the urban or the checkerboard plan of Corbusier was drawn. And it was a realization in the second phase that the villages are an integral part of the city and actually are a feeder to what the city really is today. And therefore, it was decided that it was a conscious decision taken that we must continue to have the villages in situ while the city is being developed. So the project that we are now embarking upon and have almost gone through, and Anand has been there to review it also once, and we've had inputs from him about 10 days ago. It really is about understanding the relationship between the city and the village, and also the dichotomy that the city and the village face on the interface. And we are very particularly interested in what is happening at the fringe between what we call the city and the uncity or the village. And the village or the unvillage or the city, as I'd like to call it. And these interrogations, which really take place within these sliver spaces or within this interchanging, mutually interconnected boundary of the city and the village, is very important, because it almost behaves like an organism. It keeps changing, it keeps adapting, and it's almost like a give and take situation which takes place. So more than really the village, I think it is this interface which is very important in our study. And at times, this interface is an ecological interface. At times, it is a highway, so it's an urban interface. At times, it is agricultural fields. At times, it is just one village interfacing with the other, as you will see in the case of Khuda Lahora and Khuda Jassu. These are two villages which are actually having an interface with each other. And it's important to understand the dynamics of one affecting the dynamics of the other. And this interrelationship is very intrinsic and it needs to be investigated. So we plan to continue this studio till we have created an archival resource for anybody who wishes to research on the urban villages of Chandigarh. And we plan to document it in totality and also plan to bring in from the Punjab University a set of specialists who are urban geographers, who are sociologists, who are social scientists, because they would help us actually understand the way we should look at these villages. Not that as architects we don't know how to look at them, but then as architects we try to master everything without really knowing much about anything. So that's where we need to be prodded, that these villages have to be taken as a very special part of the city, and their presence in the city can actually make the city much more vibrant. And Vandana also pointed out that it is important that these villages become an integral part of the everyday life of people. So there must be ways and mechanisms evolved whereby the urbanite should actually be drawn into the village and vice versa. Whereas the villager is automatically drawn into the city for work, for sustenance, for his livelihood. But can we think of a mechanism whereby the urban dweller also gets into the village? And I think that's a big challenge which this investigative 20 team of 20 is currently undergoing with their faculty. And now I think it's time for them to come on the platform and take over. And I'm also very happy to be joined here by Vipinda Thakur. He's really been instrumental and he's been pushing them to prepare for this presentation. And I think it's over to them now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, so much. Meenal, can you start the presentation?
Starting on with our first village, Khudda Jassu. Let's take you to a short tour to our village virtually. This is the main approach road. To the left, we have another village, Khuda Lahora, and towards right is Khudda Jassu. We can see the street vending zone right across the road. The toba for domestic animals. Used by villagers for the bathing of buffaloes. The ancient Shitla Mata temple, one of the 6 major open spaces of the village. The Gurdwara, where all the ritual take place. The heritage village well. This is considered as Khwaja or deity. Then is the Nagar Kheda, still worshipped as foundation stone of the village. The Gugga Madi, one of the various dairy farms in the village. People indulge in various commercial activities. Very prominent cow dung collection area. Cow dung is considered very sacred and used for both cooking and construction purposes. We can see the movement across the road, the use of the office courtyard for recreation activities by the children, the local street hawker, right across the pedestrian area, and below the old banyan tree. Village internal street, we can see the condition of the houses, the movement of the two-wheelers, the pedestrian movement, and the frontage and the projection of the buildings. One of the laborer settlement, completely temporary construction, and in a very dilapidated condition. The contrast of kacha construction I'm finding it to be very dense. Now, moving on to the ecology. As Chandigarh lie on the foothills of Shivaliks, the contours on the site range from 348 to 356 meters, hence having fewer undulations on the land. When the settlement started, it got established in such a form that the belt followed the contours. And this is the reason that even in the present scenario, the surface runoff is proper here. While, on the other hand, the area of the newer built settlement does not follow the topography, hence there is an issue of waterlogging here. Also, it falls under the Terai region and has tropical dry deciduous forest, but one could hardly find any indigenous trees in this area, due to which the topsoil quality is degrading here. Then moving towards the microclimate of the region, one could clearly feel the difference in the temperature drop in summers in the region of older settlement as compared to the newer one, because the older settlement has very narrow street, due to which the roads hardly receive any direct sunlight, hence absorb little of it, whereas the newer settlement is not as congested as the older one, hence having more surface area to absorb the heat. Coming on to the history and the evolution of the village, Its name, Khudda, derived from its terrain, and Jassu, named on the founding lady Jasso, who was quarantined away from the village due to a serious illness during a pandemic in those times. In that period, she cured herself and made a new village which came to be known by her name, that is Khudda Jassu. Since earlier times, Khudda Jassu had a well that was part of a garden made by Raja of Manimajra, like we saw in the video. Then is the Nagar Kheda as Shiv Roop for the worship and a pond for domestic animals. Coming on to the evolution, first is the establishment of the core. The village started developing along the well, Nagar Kheda and the Anganwadi initial stages. The first settlers were the Dhaliwals from the Jat community and their main occupation was agriculture. Then is the second in 1960, the expansion of the core. Further settlers were Brahmins, mostly from the regions of Himachal and Punjab, who were Sharmas. Their main occupation was shops and priesthoods from different rituals. The expansion reached the established core for the first time after the Brahmins settled as villagers. Then is the second phase of the expansion of the core in 1980s. The final main settlers were the Nais, who worked as laborers on the farms or as assistants to the Brahmins. They settled mainly on the Firni or the outer fringes of the village. In current scenario of the village, one can observe the Lal Dora area is densely built up and therefore hardly has any chance of further development. Unless it is vertical, therefore the spillover development is on the fringes and in organic manner whilst maintaining a coarse texture. We can see the evolution from 2000 to 2020. Most of the area outside the main Abadi area is occupied by the tenants and include majorly the migrants. The villagers have preserved the most of the village practices like the toba or pond which is used for bathing, the Nagar Kheda for worshipped as foundation stone of the village and well as the deity. Recently the village has now come under the Chandigarh Municipal Corporation, under which provisions for urban infrastructure and facilities will be made to the villagers. Coming on to land use. To understand the land use pattern and sprawl of the village, comparison is done between different time periods. The main observation from this comparison is that there is major increase of residential and commercial zone and decrease in agricultural area. For analysis of building infrastructure, various parameters like built use, building height, building ownership, age, etc. were taken into consideration and the observations made out of it is that for the built use, the percentage of rental and owner is almost same in residential type and for commercial, majority of shops and dairies can be seen and for building height, maximum floor height buildings can be seen in the core area of the village. To understand the overall grain, texture, pattern of the settlement analysis from figure ground is done and it is observed that the core area is more densely packed than the outer area and the grain and texture within core is coarse and uneven. Then we'll talk about the circulation. Khudda Jassu is adjoining village to Khudda Lahora. The entry road to the village also marks the division between Khudda Jassu and Khudda Lahora village. This sheet presents the road hierarchy as per road widths. Then is the movement across road with respect to vehicles, four-wheelers, two-wheelers, cycles, pedestrian and the animal movement. Further detailing out the material of the road, whether it is metalled, earthen, paver blocks or cemented. Then taking into consideration the governing body, whether the area is maintained by Panchayat or private dweller, the condition of the road is monitored, that is it pakka, kacha or semi-pakka. Then mobility mapping is showing the origin and destination of the movement of people at inter and intra-village level so as to spot the various points of conflict in village and monitoring relationship of village to the city. Then is the public open spaces analysis. While analyzing, total 6 number of public spaces are identified, which is divided into 3 categories on the basis of functional use. 3 religious, 2 street nodes and 1 public utility area analyzed that these are inadequate for the communities. For analysis of open space, various parameters were considered like area, vegetation, material, infrastructure, and activity with which age group is using the particular space and when is that space in use. The observations made from this analysis is that villages have small patches of open spaces at different areas, but these spaces cannot accommodate large number of population. So there is a need of one big open space like where activities like fair, etc. can take place. Coming on to infrastructure, according to URDPFI guidelines, there are all the basic amenities such as fire station, hospital, institution, etc. within the 5-kilometer range of the village, but the lack of the community gathering spaces, lack of open grounds or parks also add on to the issue of lack of refuge spaces for evacuation in case of emergencies. Recently, the water pipeline network was laid in order to provide water to the residents from Sector 39 waterworks, but at present, the village is entirely dependent on the tube well for water. The village has proper metered electricity supply but lacks in street lighting at fewer areas. Then is the character zoning. Categorizing the village into possible zones by overlapping various layers on the basis of built use, building age, community settlements, grain and texture, building height, density of trees, microclimate, street typologies, physical infrastructure, street enclosure, and village characteristic feature brought us the analysis with the identification of specific parts of the village to be treated according to their needs, strengths, opportunities, and also provide ideas about scope of improvement. While mapping the activity, the identification of the stakeholders, their categorization into subsets of visitors, residents, and administrators, and then mapping down their activities help us to create a daily cycle in the village indicating the most active and inactive time where activities are happening at various pause points and throughout the streets, which can further be classified into socio-cultural and socio-economic subsets. Then further analysis helps us to identify the issues and gives the direction for the development strategies. Moving on to the next village, Daddu Majra. Now let's have a look at it also.
The aerial view of village Daddu Majra. The approach road from the nearest sector. This is the main peripheral road which come under the extended Abadi area. This is the Guru Dronacharya Sarovar, which is dried up now and used as play area for children. Again, views of peripheral road.
We can see the movement across the road. This is the inside street. And here comes the Valmiki colony. This is the Valmiki temple. You can see the condition of the streets and the houses. Coming on to one of the houses of the village. The 300-year-old heritage tree near the Sarovar. Periphery around the Guru Dronacharya Sarovar. Which is used by children and people for their evening walks. The small connectivity between the internal and the external roads. The unauthorized garbage collection area and a place where children play. This is the Guru Dronacharya Stadium. Moving on to internal road, having government school, religious building, and some activities on the street. This is the old Shiv temple. This is Goga Madi, one of the religious places of the village. Moving on to the Potters colony. Showing some activities inside the houses.
This is the potter's house. Then again the periphery road. Talking about the ecology of the village Dadnu Majra. Ecology of this place is protected because of Patiale ki Rao Chau, which have started to get affected due to human activities, due to which land, soil and air is getting polluted. The number of trees are less in built-up areas, whereas the tree reserve forest is still having indigenous species. The major part of the soil typology for the village is covered with alluvium soil. The topography of this place gives natural slope for drainage. This place have groundwater level at 22 meter BGL, which is more than other place of Chandigarh, due to which water scarcity is there. Even the Patiale ki Rao Chau water flow decreased due to siltation and more built up area. Vegetation in this place is less than the surrounding area of the village. The place needs to bring back its natural vegetation and pond needs to be improved. Talking about the history of the place, it is related to the Mahabharat era. It is said that the Pandavas used to come to the area across the Chau for learning Ban Vidya. Here, Eklavya met Guru Dronacharya and requested to be his disciple, but Guru Dronacharya refused. So he erected the statue of Guru Dronacharya to learn Ban Vidya. The statue is now revived and still can be seen within the premise of the Dadnu Majra. In this sheet, the conjecture of evolution of settlements starting from 1960s to present year. Evolution of settlement is explained with figure ground, road connectivity, land use development with sketches. The sheet explains about how open spaces are reduced to fulfill the increased load of population. The built-ups are placed abruptly on the open spaces, which causes hindrance to the road connectivity that lead to many dead ends. Organic development in Abadi area and linear development in extended Abadi area is observed, stating the piecemeal growth. Till 1990, the mixed use and the commercial development is observed in the peripheral road of the Abadi area and the residential in the interior areas. After that, the commercial and mixed use development is along the peripheral road of extended Abadi area. Next, talking about the land use of the village. The change in land use pattern can be observed in the comparing the land use map of 2006 and 2011. At present, 52% of the total area is under residential. Building structure is old and dilapidated in core area. Residents are constructing new houses from rental point of view without any planning and design. Commercial area occupies about 4.1% of the total area. People have made shops in front of their houses abutting to roads or streets. The ground floor is used as shops and upper story is used for residential purpose. The area under circulation comes to around 4.2 acres, which is 33% of the total area of village Dadnu Majra. Narrow lane, street, defective junctions, reductions in carriageway due to encroachment resulting blockade and traffic jams. It creates inconvenience to public. There are very less number of open spaces in the village. At present, 2.1% of the total open spaces are there. More area of open spaces are being taken up by the villagers for the construction of their houses. Next, talking about the circulation of the village Dadnu Majra. The sheet is about the dependence of commuters from the city and neighboring areas on Dadnu Majra road for travelling to and fro. The network of road along the material typology is shown. The street pattern that has developed in response to the peculiar nature of joint family clusters, which at times wind up in a dead end. The last mile connectivity and location of the nearest bus stop from the village. The pedestrian nature of internal streets and pathways and increasing vehicle inaccessibility due to narrowing of internal roads. Open spaces helps us understand the relationship between space and activity. With the comparison between figure ground and Nolly map, it can be concluded that including the road and public spaces, 68% of the total space can be used freely by the public. The space can be categorized into three categories: public, semi-public, and private, among which Sarovar bring the largest open space in the village. Then there is a location of space with respect to activities like the Sarovar, Dronacharya Stadium, Heritage Tree, open space being used for parking near main road, etc. Followed by typology of space with respect to ambience. Then a route has been carved which takes a person through all the different hierarchy of space in and around the village, followed by the footfall of different age group in these respected areas. Next, talking about the infrastructure of the village, physical and social infrastructure is considered. URDPFI guidelines have been referred for the study and analyzing the infrastructure. The physical infrastructure includes water supply, solid waste management, and electrical services. And physical infrastructure, starting from the main source to distribution to each household, is explained along with the related issues. Social infrastructure includes educational facilities, healthcare facility, socio-culture facility, open spaces, sport facility, etc. Proximities of the social infrastructure is shown considering the diameter of 3, 5, 10, 15 km. Next, talking about the activity pattern of the village. Any village character is defined by its activities. Activities in terms of occupation, recreation, religious, commercial, social, etc. The village Dadumajra has various zones defined by the activity, like the major commercial street, the historical tree consisting of chopal for community interaction, a sarovar which had a great importance in the beginning stage of evolution of village, which has now dried up, the Dronacharya Stadium used for recreation purposes, various religious landmarks of various communities. The village has various dead spots due to criminal activities, lack of urban infrastructure, etc. Through various study of nodes and edges, we understand that the close relation of villagers, they have good socio contact and communal relations. Hence, they have sense of shared resources and space for community activities. The central Abadi area has dense population and hence the grain and texture of the village varies from the periphery to the core of village, leading to certain junctions being active to certain junctions being problematic and inactive. Talking about the morphology of the village, the sheets talk about the grain, texture and form of the urban village. Different layers have been superimposed to find out the overlapping areas. These areas are divided into clusters for finding out the different driving elements that make up the whole village, such as intellectually stimulating places, community and their self-interest, and so on.
Coming on to observations from our two villages. First one being the soil degradation due to piling of the garbage, as you can see in the picture to the right. Then is new expansion of village not following the terrain, as we saw in the ecology. Then is the rampant densification in Abadi area that can be traced back from history. Amalgamation of organic and plant settlement. Likewise, the new buildings are coming up. Lack of vegetation due to new construction. Siltation and soil erosion near the Patiala Ki Rao Chow is a major problem. Change of ownership, which is quite evident from the land use. Hindrance in thoroughfare across the street, across the villages. We can see it. We have various dead ends. No cul-de-sacs. Then is the major congestion at the entry of the villages, acting as the major junction or the node. Then is the lack of maintenance in water supply and sewerage line. Lack of community gathering spaces, like we saw while analyzing the open spaces of villages. Then is the certain inactive zones bounded by major nodes. Then we can find various male dominant spaces in the villages.